want to say good morning to everybody. To those of you who are new to Represent, I'm Christine Jacobs. I'm the executive director of this organization. We are the PAC in Pennsylvania that's dedicated to electing progressive women across the whole state exclusively to the state legislature, both the House and the Senate. We think that we all believe in a reflective democracy, that our legislature should look like all of Pennsylvania, and we are working hard towards that goal, because right now it doesn't. Hey, today I'm going to introduce you to the Represent PA executive team. Many of you are used to hearing me chatter on and on about what's going on, but so many of the parts of this organization are not just me. We have a very fine executive team who work hard in the areas of communication and finance and compliance, because as a PAC, we have to do all kinds of filings, and communications and making sure you all hear from us, making sure that we're amplifying the messages of our electeds and candidates. So there's a lot of people behind the scene, and we thought we'd use today's topic to really not only amplify our progressive messaging, but also to introduce you to the people who are doing all the work. We're going to talk about what is progressive messaging. We're going to explain how Pennsylvania is not providing for Pennsylvanians. And that's our state legislature continues to fail us in so many ways. And yet the news, especially the national news, is full of Afghanistan and the virus. Understand, but there's not enough focus on everyday issues, those kitchen table issues, the things that affect everybody in Pennsylvania, and that's what we're going to talk about. And we're going to propose some ideas for getting what we need. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of these values we've talked about these values before, things that we believe in, things that are important to us, the things on which we evaluate candidates when they send in their applications for endorsement. And all of these things are things that are important to all of us. We also have talked before about a number of the measures on which you can just tell that our legislature is not doing what we need them to do. Reproductive rights, abortion providers are not in most of the counties in the state. And I always feel like our state legislature, when they don't feel like doing anything else, decide, let's do another anti-abortion bill. And it's getting old, and it's not what we need in the state. And it's not actually majority of the Pennsylvanians don't agree with what they're doing, and yet this is their action. And we're going to get into some of these other issues in a few minutes and talk about them in a little different way than we've done before. So we're going to use words that people have now talked about, words that win. We talk about, oh God, this is terrible, this is bad. But we have found, and so many people who have done the research on this have found, that talking about things in a negative sense turns people off. And it tells them that, oh my God, I don't want to hear this again. Everything's negative. All you can do is point out the negative. And we know that there's a lot of negative in Pennsylvania. Annette Schenker-Osario came up with this topic of messaging the moment, and working with communitychange.org has adopted a lot of these messages. Many of us who are on the executive team, and I'm sure some of you, have gone on to Mobilize and found some of their webinars on words that win and how to use positive progressive messaging to inspire voters. And instead of leading with problems, let's first talk about our shared values, things that we all believe in, and then talk about, inspire people to talk about the society we'd like to see. And then we can get into legislation that's needed. But if I keep talking about how 82% of our counties don't have abortion providers, people are going to sit there going, and, so they can go to another county, and what's the big deal? And I'm tired of talking about this. Well, let's talk about these things in terms of what we as Pennsylvanians want to see. And we thought this would be a good way to start kicking off what we're going to look at for the 2022 elections. What Pennsylvania do we want? So the way we're going to work this today is I've asked each of the executive teams to talk about one of the shared values, to give you a message that's a positive one in the same way that it talks about messaging the moment. Let's talk about a positive message for this. We'll give you some examples of where things are not going well. And we're going to point out for many of them, our state legislators, the people that we have helped elect over the last few cycles, are working on these things. But guess what? They're not in the majority. And in Pennsylvania is one of the states in the country where the minority members of the legislature have zero power. Yes, we have minority chairs of committees, but they're not allowed to bring in legislation. The only legislation that's brought up has to be, even if, this is my favorite statistic, even those laws that have both Republicans and Democrats co-signing the proposed legislation, it is up to the speaker, or it's up to the majority head of the Senate to decide what comes to be discussed. For example, in the Environment Committee, they almost never talk about climate change. They talk about drilling. And that's because the chairman of that committee, that's all he wants to talk about. The minority cannot bring up issues. They can call hearings on their own, but they can't call official hearings. So let's talk about some of these issues. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have each of our executive team members introduce themselves, give a couple minutes, a minute or two on their own background and how long they've been working with Represent, and then tell you what a positive message is on that subject. And they've each got about 5 or 6 minutes to do that. We're going to go through half a dozen of these issues. So Marie, Carroll, Muffy, do you want to lead off?
Thank you, Christine. Yes, I'm Muffy Carroll, and I spend most of my time either in Center City, Philadelphia, or up in our family home in the Poconos in Claudette Williams's area, driving through Tara's area, ABE, on my way up here. The issue that I wanted to speak to today is the environment, and I think it's of paramount importance because it intersects really with everything else that we'll be talking about here today. The things that are happening in our environment are clearly pointing out some of the other inequities and issues, because often it is the folks that have less resources that are being most impacted by a lot of these environmental issues. And we can talk about the way the legislature's failing us, and talk about the fact, as Christine said, there's more focus on energy and drilling, and the perception that for the state to be, to draw the right corporations in and to help with employment, that we have to have loose regulations that don't protect our natural resources and our environment. So there's an implied trade-off that we've just got to, the environment be damned, let's let people extract. And the net result is that we have a state that really ranks poorly on many of the attributes with our natural environment. And we're the only state that does not actually tax those that are extracting from our environment. And we've had incredibly poor drinking water. But as Christine said, one of the things we really need to focus on isn't just the negatives. We all are seeing the impacts of global warming, be it the storms and the wild weather shifts and all of that. So far, Pennsylvania's escaped the worst of the wildfires and things like that, but certainly, we're feeling a lot of the effects. But it's important to look to what are the things that we as a state can do to start addressing these issues. We have a lot of farmland here in the state, and if we can help the small farmers with ways in which they can do the kind of farming practices that can enrich the soils and turn things around so that we're actually capturing carbon in our soils with how we're doing our farming methods, and we're avoiding the use of the petrochemical-based fertilizers and the like, in order to again have a environmentally sound farming practices and all of that. These are some of the kinds of things that require some leadership in Harrisburg to promote these kinds of activities and things that really can make a difference. I'm going to stick a book that I recommend people read in the chat that has some very important. It explains a lot of how we've gotten to where we are, but talks very positively about some of the steps that we can take. It's a series of essays, and takes somewhat of a feminist approach to the environment. There are a lot of essays from indigenous peoples and from a variety of folks that have been involved in the environmental community for years. But it really is a wonderful read that gives you an idea of some of the actions that we individually can take and that collectively we need to take to start making a difference in our environment. In terms of you see in the box on the slide that we do have several of our endorsed legislators that are committed to be working hard on the environmental issues. Carolyn Comita and Katie Muth on the Senate side, and several folks on the House side who have really made the environment a big part of their focus and their themes. So
it's great. Thank you so much, Muffy. And I think some of you may have been on our call a few weeks ago where we had Carolyn Comita and Amanda Capoletti on, talking about what kind of legislation that they want to be working on. And the thing to remember here always is the Pennsylvania Constitution is a most positive statement around it, that it's people have the right to these things, and yet our legislature is failing us. So thank you, Muffy. Meg Pritchard. Meg is in charge of our political committee. So anybody who's been involved in the endorsement process and certainly all of our candidates know who Meg is. So Meg, it's your floor.
Thanks, Chris. So as Muffy mentioned, many of these issues that we've been discussing are really interconnected, which is why I joined this organization in the first place. Is that, in 2017, I went to a breakfast briefing. Back then we were doing them live, and, looking for something to do, looking to be able to impact across a number of different issues in Pennsylvania. And I was blown away by this organization. So I have, as Chris has said, been, working on the political committee, working on the endorsement process, both with the candidates and with our supporters for about 4 years. I have a law background thrown in there with a little bit of journalism and a bunch of marketing. So I run an agency that helps lawyers and law firms market their professionals. So that's what I do on a daily basis. And in and around that, I dedicate my time to represent. And so one of the really interconnected issues that I've been thinking about and reading about and arguing with people on Facebook over is a living wage. And you can see on the slide that really startling number, which is that Pennsylvania's minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. It is as low as a state can have under federal law. It's the lowest minimum wage of all the states that abut Pennsylvania, including, surprise, West Virginia. It is actually more than $1 less than even the next lowest state, which I believe is New Jersey, based on what I looked at what I've seen over the weekend, doing a little bit of an in-depth look. The state minimum wage hasn't changed since 2009, which is more than 12 years. And that's when the federal government raised the wage, forcing the states to increase the minimum wage to 15 cents an hour, a whopping 15 cents an hour from, $7.10. And it's been stuck there ever since, in large part because of our state legislature, which is controlled by, of course, the Republicans. So, what does that mean for Pennsylvania residents? Workers with minimum wage jobs gross less than $300 a week for your average 40 hours. That's gross before taxes. But most of our minimum wage workers don't work just one job because they can't. It's not a living wage. They cannot survive on it. So they are forced to cobble together 2 or 3 jobs. And often those jobs, don't provide them with anything more than, a basic hourly rate, no benefits. Contrary actually to popular belief, the workers who work minimum wage jobs are not all in high school or college kids working to make money on the side. The 16 to 19-year-old age group really makes up only about a quarter of the jobs at that pay rate. The average, actually, you can see those statistics there, the average minimum wage worker is 35 years old. So these are Pennsylvanians that are trying to support themselves and their families. And as you can see, the low minimum wage, the less than living wage, actually disproportionately impacts women and people of color. And when we talk about minimum wage and living wage, those two terms really are not the same, right? So in addition to the 90,000 or more folks that hold minimum wage jobs, there are 700,000 or 800,000 workers who make more than the state minimum wage, but less than $12 an hour, which is a rate that's sort of been bandied about a little bit as maybe a next step. And another really large group of Pennsylvania workers who make less than $15 an hour, which is becoming the bellwether really for what people see as a true living wage. So while the numbers vary, the impact of raising our minimum wage to a living wage of $15 an hour would be to lift the income and the living conditions of at least 1 million people and possibly as many as 2 million Pennsylvania residents. And what that means for those Pennsylvanians, of course, is not having to cobble together those jobs, not living paycheck to paycheck, being able to, put a little money aside, and not having to live without essentials like food and prescriptions and health insurance. They can withstand an emergency if they have a little put aside, a health issue, a car repair, a pandemic, a little easier. It also would mean that they wouldn't have to rely on public assistance for everyday essentials, which puts really a tremendous strain on Pennsylvania taxpayers. And we're essentially subsidizing companies that are resisting, paying a living wage. Another little known fact about living wage is that the cost of living, of course, we all know varies from community to community, but at the moment, the law in Pennsylvania actually prevents local communities from setting a higher minimum wage. So, local communities can't say, we want to pay or have our companies pay workers more because the cost of, say, housing is higher here than it is in other parts of the state. So, the law currently prohibits local communities, municipalities from doing that. Now, our endorsed legislators, you can see them in the box there, our senators and our representatives have been working, tirelessly to try to get this minimum wage raised to a living wage. It's too early, not enough tea. But as Christine said, they can't do it without the ability to, introduce those bills and, have testimony on them that would show people, the really detrimental effect not having a living wage in Pennsylvania is having on, a million or more Pennsylvania citizens.
That's great. Thank you, Meg. And in both of these so far you've heard is that these are all intertwined. The environment is intertwined with healthcare. Living wage is intertwined with people's healthcare and their ability to pay for their benefits, but also their education and where they're able to live. All of these issues are important together. Thanks, Meg. Speaking of education, Helen Horseman Allen. Helen manages our finances. She knows where all the bills are. She keeps track of donations, but she also manages our compliance process with our outside attorney. So Helen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Helen Horseman Allen. I got involved with Represent in 2017. It wasn't the first time I met Chris, but it was the time that got me going. So if you've been to lots of these before and maybe haven't decided to get involved, it's never too late. And Chris will never be like, well, it seems like you've come to a lot of these and why are you waiting until now to step up? It's always time to step up. I wanted to talk about education. I have a 10-year-old and 8-year-old twins. And so when I got involved, they were 6 and 4, maybe almost 5 and 3. Gosh, it's been a long time. And, I think education is such a critical issue. Like all parents of children that age, I had been paying for private preschool, private daycare. There's very, very few children in the state of Pennsylvania are in any kind of state or locally supported preschool program. And when I was doing it, I thought to myself, well, we'll be done with this soon. This giant expense will be removed from my life. I could probably dedicate some of that money towards supporting my children's school, right? And I was like, well, how much money could I send them, right? Like, maybe a couple $1,000s a kid, maybe a little bit more than that. And then I thought, what's the school going to do with that, right? If I could send my school $5,000, I could send them $5,000 a year, every year that my kids went there. What are they going to do with that money? Maybe get some air conditioners. My children's school just did a big push to get water fountains put in. Obviously classroom supplies. And I thought, gosh, that doesn't seem like very much, right? That doesn't seem like that's going to make much of a difference. And when my kids graduate, it's gone. And I was talking to Chris, and of course, Chris is very persuasive. And we started talking about what it looks like to support our legislators. And the reality is, we support legislators anywhere from $1,000 to kind of at the high end, $30,000 or $40,000. And she said, couldn't you put that money to better use? And I thought, yeah, couldn't I put that money to better use? The reality is, I cannot personally fix my children's schools, right? None of us can. My children go to Philadelphia public schools. Numerous Philadelphia public schools have an asbestos problem. I cannot personally fund asbestos removal, right? But I can put my money together with all of the rest of you, and we can try to elect legislators who are dedicated to this cause. I think it's almost 30 years ago, the very astute political commentator really summed up my own opinion. I believe it was Whitney Houston who said, I believe the children are our future, right? So we have to teach them well, then let them lead the way. We rob from our own future when we don't adequately fund public schools. And the legislature knows it, right? A couple of years ago, last year maybe, the legislature passed a new school funding formula. Pennsylvania has one of the lowest state contribution rates for schools, but in addition to having this very low rate, we were distributing these funds in a very inequitable way. So they changed the formula. Great, this is so awesome. I can't wait. It recognized the additional cost of people for whom English isn't a first language, the additional cost of educating high poverty students. And it was like, great, so Philadelphia is gonna see tons of money. Some of our more impoverished districts all over the state are gonna see tons of money. Well, the new formula only applied to new dollars, which was less than 5% of the total budget, right? So for the new dollars, we're going to distribute them more equitably, but not for the old ones. So you can see behind me, I'm sitting in a classroom. This is the classroom that my children were educated in for all of last year. I had 5 kids in my house every day. And maybe some of you have children or grandchildren who went to school 5 days a week last year. And COVID has been a big hit for all of us, but it really exposed the inequities in our educational system, because the kids who got to go to school last year were the kids who were in buildings that could accommodate them outside of their classroom, the kids who had extra resource rooms, the kids who had larger cafeterias, the kids who had gyms, the kids whose schools could spread them out outside and inside. And those kids got to go to school 5 days a week last year. Maybe not all year long, maybe not every single week, but they got to attend school 5 days a week. My children went to school 0 days a week for most of the year, and then 2 days a week at the very, very end, because they were splitting the kids up so that every other group was there. That had a huge impact, right? That had a huge impact on the kids at my children's school and children all over our state. Some kids got a year of education, and some kids basically didn't, right? Like they had teachers who tried their very best. They had administrators who really were trying to do right by them. But the reality is what we saw last year was the result of decades of inequitable funding, right? And I think I felt like that was a call to me to say how critically important this is, right? If we were willing to sacrifice a year of our children's education, right? 1 out of 12 years, because we can't fix this problem, right? Are we going to let it happen again? So for me, this was a renewed call to the importance of funding this. We have so many terrific legislators who are working on it. We had Lindsay Williams come speak to us not too long ago, talking about all the work she's doing in the Education Committee in the Senate. We have several of our other representatives working in the House. Like, this is an issue that so many people in the state care about. And it's an issue that can be fixed at the state legislature level, but it has to be fixed by the whole state coming together, right? Pennsylvania can fix its schools, but every individual school can't fix itself. So that's what brings me here.
Very good.
Thank you so much, Helen. Again, this is such a critical issue, and we all believe, our value is that we believe that our children deserve a solid education, whether they're in the public schools or the private schools. We need to support our children's education for the long term, for the good of this whole state. Next is Tillie Forlock. Tillie's going to be talking to you a little bit about healthcare. And there are so many issues involved in healthcare, including reproductive freedom. Tillie is our operations manager who we recently hired. So welcome, Tillie, to the group, and tell us about healthcare.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tillie Forlock. It is really great to be here. Like Chris said, I just joined the Represent organization about a month or so ago, and I couldn't be more excited to be here and to be joining all you guys in this really great work at the statewide level. That's where we make all the difference on the ground. And my background is in language and cultural studies, so I really understand how important it is to make sure that all voices are heard and represented fairly throughout our government, throughout our governing body in general. And yeah, I'd like to talk to you about healthcare today. And I think we can all agree here, healthcare is a human right, and that should not be a controversial statement. However, we have these Republican lawmakers in Pennsylvania in the majority, and they've been working against that a little bit, undermining that right to healthcare for all. And they do that through things like anti-choice legislation. A couple examples of that recently, there's been the heartbeat bill that was working to prohibit abortion after a fetal heartbeat is detected, and that can be as early as 5 to 6 weeks into a pregnancy, which is for most women who are pregnant earlier than they even realize that they're pregnant. Another example of some anti-choice legislation going on in Pennsylvania recently was the fetal burial bill, which was trying to mandate that miscarriages and abortions handled at healthcare facilities would be treated as fetal deaths, and that they would be required to have a formal burial or cremation process, regardless of how long the pregnancy lasted previously. As well, as we all know, Pennsylvania has a huge disparity between its rural and its urban areas across the state. And about 2/3 of Pennsylvania residents live in rural counties, with the remainder about 1/3 living in the urban counties. And we see there are often major health disparities between rural and urban areas in terms of access to healthcare. Oftentimes, Pennsylvanians living in rural areas, they face different issues than those living in urban areas. For example, people living in rural areas often have limited access to healthcare. They may not have transportation to get to a doctor who may be something like 20, 30 miles away. Less availability in general. And reproductive healthcare we see is often particularly limited in availability depending on where you live. For example, 82% of counties in Pennsylvania have no abortion providers whatsoever, no access to reproductive healthcare alternatives and options. And 48% of Pennsylvania women live in these counties with no abortion clinics whatsoever, which obviously limits their ability to make a choice for themselves. As well, things like Medicaid does not ever cover abortion services, and public funding is only available for abortion in cases of life endangerment, rape, or incest, obviously very, very limited. And we are still facing things like these 24-hour waiting period requirements that are in place before anyone is able to access abortion services in the state. Other things like providers, healthcare providers are still not required to be factually accurate, even while providing the legally required counseling leading up to a patient receiving an abortion. They're allowed to use scare tactics, they're allowed to use disinformation to try to discourage women from seeking all of the available reproductive healthcare options that they have. And you know, abortion is healthcare and should be treated as such. It's not such a scandalous idea to treat it the way we treat everything else in the healthcare sphere. Instead, though, the Republican majority prevents this. They're here making all the decisions for us. They're here deciding what is even talked about in the legislature. And you know, in order to protect women's right to choose and women's right to have reproductive choice, free choice, we need to flip the state legislature blue, and we need to elect more Democratic women in order to achieve equal and fair representation for all Pennsylvanians. And as well, there is another area of major concern in healthcare and healthcare access would be racial disparities in receiving healthcare services across Pennsylvania. So as we all know, most of Pennsylvania's population is white. It's something like 82% is white right now. And yet Black Pennsylvanians are experiencing, we know for a fact, experiencing worse health outcomes. They're having lower life expectancies. They are dying at higher rates, and that includes both infant and maternal mortality. And all of those numbers are worse compared to the white population in the state, the white majority. In the case of maternal mortality, for example, Black women in Pennsylvania are 3 times more likely to die during or after pregnancy or childbirth than white women. And this is due to, as we know, unequal access to healthcare and lack of funding for hospitals in certain regions, leading to a lower quality of care for some Pennsylvania women, depending on where they live. And healthcare is a right, and it should never depend on one's gender, race, age, zip code, anything like that. And I think it's so important to push for more democratic legislature and to make sure that we have women representing us and women there to understand the needs of our fellow women. As you can see on the side here, we've got a couple of our endorsed legislators on health committees in both the Senate and the House, and they're doing really, really good work, but they are still in the minority, and we're just pushing to change that.
That's great. Thank you, Tillie. By the way, Tillie mentioned maternal mortality, and Morgan Cephas, who's a House member, has been chairing a lot of the efforts around that area, and we've been a proud supporter of hers since she first ran for the legislature. Thanks, Tillie. I don't know where the title of this one went, but Pat West is going to be talking about gun safety and police reform. We view these, the top title is somewhere down on the bottom. But she's going to be talking about police reform and gun safety. So Pat West, please.
Good morning, and thank you, Chris, and thank all of you for joining us. My background is more than 20 years in public health and data, and one of the things I bring to my work with Represent is the ability to, as Chris said, the importance of amplifying what it is we are concerned about and reaching as many people as possible. When we look at gun violence, however, and how it affects the health of our citizens, we don't really have good data. And so it's really difficult to make the best decisions. As you notice in the slide, 62% of gun deaths in Pennsylvania are suicides. Suicide is a much larger issue in terms of how we kill ourselves with guns than is homicide, but we don't hear about suicides so much. We hear about homicides. They get a lot more media than, it's not they get more media than they deserve, but they get more media than is represented by the data. One of the things that I want you to know is that it's really hard to get good data on what happens with guns and how it affects our individual health. So I will refer you to Every Town for Gun Safety. It is a primary source of much of the solid data. And it's currently funded mostly by Michael Bloomberg, and it represents a blending of Mayors Against Illegal Guns and Moms Demand Action. And it was actually created in 2013. When you need good data, that's a place to start. However, the importance of why we want you and everyone else to understand the role of guns in our lives is that it's really hard to understand actually that gun deaths are much greater. The gun fatalities for homicides are more than 40,000 a year in our country. Actually, it's not just from homicide, total gun deaths, but the non-fatal gun injuries are greater than 100,000. It's hard to find that, and it's hard to know if it's reliable. The CDC and others were tasked with getting you good gun data, but the legislators in Congress decided that that wasn't really a good idea. What galvanizes us publicly were 3 mass shootings in schools. The first one of note was in 1999. The last one in Florida was in 2018. But it didn't change any policy. We had these 3 huge events and nothing changed other than our attitudes personally, but it didn't change the outcomes in legislation. From public health, I believe that data should drive action, but it's hard to make sure that happens. As Chris points out in the slide, 62% of gun deaths are actually suicides, but that you don't hear about that in the media. But we have a lot of options as to how we change that outcome, but it's not happening in Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Pat. We need to move on. Sorry, okay. Pat.
That's all right.
And we do intertwine the subject of police reform with gun safety, in that our police would be a lot safer also, and feel a less need for their guns if there were fewer guns on the street. Heidi Siegel is going to talk about fair pay and the issues around discrimination against different groups in the state.
Good morning. My name is Heidi Siegel. I'm the communication director for Represent. I have been in communication of some sort, whether it's PR, media, corporate communication, or journalism for my entire career. And I'm now working with Represent to do communication. And I also have my finger in a lot of other community related board work, as well as being the president of the Home School Association at Central High School, where my daughter is a senior. When it comes to equity, I think that you'll notice on this slide in particular, I don't have a box in the corner, because identifying which committees and which there isn't just one. The reality of equity related to pay, related to how people are treated, touches all of the topics and issues that we're already mentioned this morning. When you think about the fact that, you know, the message that we're talking about is that we all deserve these things that we're addressing that are issues in Pennsylvania. Everyone deserves fair pay for a day's work. Everyone deserves a good, solid education that's funded equitably across the state. Everyone deserves to be able to have a job or a house and not be kicked out of it because of who they love or what they look like. And everybody deserves to live in a place that is allowing them to breathe clean air and drink clean water. So with regards to equity, you know, my hope today is what you take away is that across the state of Pennsylvania, we are daily in a fight against inequitable policies and inequitable solutions that are coming out of Harrisburg. You know, some of the things that Meg talked about when it comes to equal pay, we're still unequal, men and women and white women versus women of color. We're still unequal when it comes to the environment and where we consider putting low income housing and where we do our cleanups first. We're still unequal in whether or not you have any protections in your jobs if you are in the LGBTQIA plus community. So one of the things that, you know, I feel strongly about, and one of the reasons that I signed up to join Represent PA is also because, you know, women in this state are as smart or smarter than the men, yet we still rank 40th out of 50 states when it comes to women getting elected in office. And yes, that's up from 2018, but you know, until we have equity with our legislature, all the bills that women fight for, that we all know we need to address, aren't going to change because the Republican control in the House and the Senate is going to constantly restrict any of our good ideas or proposals or policy changes from even getting out of committee and bringing them to the House or Senate floor. So I don't have a whole lot more to offer in terms of equity, just to say that I feel like this issue is the one thread that strings all of these other issues together. And if we continue to try and raise money and elect more women up in Harrisburg that are going to fight for our progressive values, the more success we're going to have in making this a more equitable state. Thanks.
Thanks, Heidi. So there you have it. So there you have what we consider some of the big issues. And I hope you noticed, and Heidi did sum it up well, that all of these issues are intertwined. And they all would be different if we had a reflective democracy. If our legislators look like the people of the state and not just who they personally, and if it wasn't mostly white guys. We believe in a reflective democracy. I've said that before. We also believe in electing people, women, who want to do something. You know, I say often that some people run for office to be somebody. Hey, I'm a state legislator. I get benefits. I get pension. I get to hire my relatives. And some people run for office to do something, to have an impact, because there's one or more issues they want to care about, because they see injustices in our society and in their districts. And these are the people that we want to elect. And we work hard to make sure that we endorse women who want to make a difference. Currently, 88 Dems and 113 Republicans and 2 vacancies in the House, and 21 Dems and 29 Republicans and 1 independent who votes Republican in the Senate. In 2022, we need 14 flips in the House and 4 flips in the Senate for the tie, and then to have a Democratic Lieutenant Governor. Redistricting may be the key in all this for a few reasons. One is that until the new districts come out, we're not going to have new candidates in many of the districts because they're hesitant to, many potential candidates are hesitant to throw their hats into the ring, depending on what the district looks like. It's also, things are going to be late this year. You've seen a lot of the press in the last couple of weeks about the changing population and the growth in the population, mostly in Pennsylvania, in the Southeast, but also in the Cumberland and York area and Lancaster and some in the Allentown area, a little bit in Allegheny, but much of the state has lost population or has just not grown in the same way. Many of you were on our call a few weeks ago with the new head of the HDCC, the House Democratic Campaign Committee for Pennsylvania, Trevor Sutherland, and he talked about deep canvassing, and that is underway in Pennsylvania right now, where they're going through and asking people, what is your real issue? What are the things that concern you? What are the things that are involved in your everyday life? What would you like to see that's different? And that has actually started to happen in Pennsylvania this year. And that may also control who decides to run for office. But you know, the late release of the census data implies that more money is needed because it has to be spent over a more concentrated period of time once the districts are decided and we can have candidates. This also may mean that the primaries are pushed out because we don't know what the districts are going to look like yet, and there won't be time for signatures and the whole process. It's going to be a busy 2022. Next slide. Before I get to this, I wanted to see, I noticed that Darisha Parker was on. Darisha, are you still on the call? Can you tell, Tillie, do you know if she's still on?
Let's take a look here.
I thought since we had one of our newer state reps who called in today at the.
No? I don't think she's still here.
Okay, but she called in earlier, and this is the kind of thing we like to do. We've also got a few of our past candidates on this call. Our next call is going to be on Tuesday, August 31st, and we are going to have two of our past candidates, Deb Siamaka and Lisser Geiger-Schulman, who are both looking at 2022, but want to make sure that they can get elected this time. I think Deb lost by less than 100 votes in the last election. She's in Delaware County. But they're going to come in and talk about the deep canvassing and the listening tours that they are on in their parts of the state and what can be different next time. And we're going to encourage other past candidates. We see you, Tara Zrinski, and others to call in next time. We want to make sure that we get more people on, that we have you come in and talk about what's going on and how important these things are. You know, I mentioned Tara is on today. Claudette Williams is also on today. These are past candidates we've supported who are looking to see what's going to happen in the districts and how this is going to work. Did you like it? Did we present you with the burning need for change? Are you understanding why we're so passionate about the work we're doing? And can you find us other people who want to donate to us? Go out into your networks. And I love being able to drop these tidbits on people. Do you know Pennsylvania has the most uneven funding of education? Don't you think citizens in Pennsylvania are entitled to fair funding of schools? That kind of thing. We firmly believe that if you drop these things on your friends, they're going to want to get to know us better. How do we do that? We'd like you to invite them to future breakfast briefings. We'd like you to send us a note and let us know that you'd like to have a gathering of your friends. It can be Zoom or it could be in real life. We'll go to any part of the state you want, but we're happy to sit down and talk about these issues.
Chris, it looks like Nathalie wanted to make a comment.
Nathalie.
Oh, just a quick one. First of all, this was great. Everybody, I mean, really, I'm so impressed always with what I hear. And I just want to emphasize again that a year ago, you know, it was like we were dealing with the same kinds of things. And I thought what you said at the beginning, Chris, that we have got to find the right messaging this time. I mean, all the data, and I couldn't agree more with Pat West about data and so on. But what is it that's going to move people here to vote differently? And it's not just all of this information. It's got to be somehow that we're going, and I think this canvassing is going to help. But I just had to say that. Thank you.
No, that's great. And if you go back and watch the recording that we have of our event with Trevor Sutherland, that's exactly
That's it. Absolutely.
Going on and looking at all the different ways we can make a difference. So we're going to run a different kind of campaign, sets of campaigns in 2022 than we did in 2020. At our next call, which is next week, you'll hear about some of the difference. You know, Deb Siamaka talks about the different things she's learning from people that she wishes she had known in 2020, but she didn't do this kind of canvassing and a lot less listening because of the pandemic. And so she's taking advantage of this year to learn these things so she can have different messages next time. And I think thank you for bringing that up, Nathalie. That's exactly what we're trying to do, is change our messaging. But in order to do that, we need money, and these candidates need money, and these candidates need money to be on the street. These candidates need money to go out there and run these campaigns. And so you'll be hearing from us asking for 2021 contributions. Also, reminder, anybody who makes a 2021 contribution of $1,200 or more gets to be part of our endorsement process for the primaries in the spring. So in the winter, actually. So it's all very important. Any other questions you have and any ideas you have, like Nathalie's, about things that we can do better in the future? Okay, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this different look at Represent today, and a different look about how we're running, and I hope you all got the passion of the people who are on our executive committee. We welcome anybody else who wants to volunteer to join us. We're here. We love getting new ideas. I love when somebody says, well, why don't you do this? And I go, oh, didn't occur to us. And that's the value of bringing in new people and different thinking. So thank you, everybody. Watch for the announcement about next week's event, and we appreciate all of your support.